I don't know about you, but I got tired of all the Cricut videos being about clean white lettering on kitchen walls and Stanley Cups. I wanted to make something cool. So I fired up my conjuration station and got to work planning some Dungeons and Dragons related crafts. The first one I wanted to do was to make holiday gifts for my D&D party that I had been playing with since 2021. I needed an easy confidence builder, so I went with some coin pouches for the relevant organizations of Waterdeep that our player characters had joined earlier in our campaign. The Harpers, Emerald Enclave, Blackstaff, Order of the Gauntlet, and the Zentrum. And then I chose the symbol of Hallister for our DM. There were no SVGs of these icons readily available to use here, at least not all of them, so I created them myself and tweaked them to be scalable for this project. I made a few extras as well. I have the set that I made here linked below if you have a use for them. I then added them to Cricut Design Space, duplicated each so I could have one symbol for each side of the pouch, and then I aligned everything, sized for my pouches, chose basic heat transfer vinyl or everyday iron-on as the material, and fired that off to be cut. I'm just using some basic Warama generic white HTV for this project. This was my first ever HTV experience with my Cricut, so I didn't really know what to expect. I ordered a cheap $16 mini heat press to apply the HTV, since this will be a very small scale project, linked below. I didn't initially have a heat press mat, and I regretted it, so I later ordered this eCraft one for $15, also linked below. For the pouches, I grabbed this bulk generic velvet drawstring gift bag set for around $14. They are 2 inches by 2.8 inches, which I had determined was roughly the right size for a faux prop coin pouch. Obviously, there's different sizes you could grab, but this felt right for the gift project, and I sized my icons in Design Space to base around this. All in all, I'm about $35 in for this kind of project being done for the first time, excluding the HTV. I pulled a bit of HTV from this $40 Warama, like I said, generic set for the project, but I'm only using a few inches of it, so only $1 or so of actually used HTV here. Probably not even that. I'll keep tallying cost as we go. It took a couple of times for me to get the right cut settings and arrangement for me to easily pull these tiny details off. Well, more than a couple times. Again, this was my first ever HTV project, and I ran into a fair bit of confusion. First, figuring out which side to cut on was not as easy as it seems. All those videos about getting started with HTV just say to cut the shiny side. But my HTV and the sample Cricut HTV included with my machine was similarly shiny on both sides. After a couple failed cuts, realizing I was cutting the protective layer and not the vinyl itself, I wound up just having to peel a corner to find out which side was transparent before placing it on my mat, with the transparent side going down on the mat. Then I had to increase pressure a little bit to be sure those super tiny details I needed to weed out were fully cut out, as this is a really small scale for such intricate iconography. Once my icons were cut and materials were gathered, it was time to get to work. First, I weeded out my icons and cut the backing so I could just apply them when I was ready. This was no small feat given the small size. Then I got my first pouch ready. I preheated my mini press and then pre-warmed the pouch with a quick press directly on it. I'd recommend using parchment paper at this point too instead of direct contact, but it was fine. Given the cheap material used for these pouches, I was really afraid they would start melting under the heat press. Thankfully, they did not. I then grabbed some parchment paper from the kitchen, cut a rectangle to size, and started pressing my first icon. I went with the Zentrum one first, for a character that actually left our party, but would be inherited by the player's new character. Unfortunately, the surrounding circle for the Zentrum icon was too thin and had to be omitted here, so I just couldn't successfully weed it. So it's just the little snaky boy. I'd say I held my heat press on the icon for 15 to 30 seconds at a time on the main part with 2-ish or 3-ish passes moving it around as I went. I then had to go back and apply extra heat and pressure to the really small details or the corners of the wings and such like that to make sure they actually stayed stuck on the bag. This was due not only to my inexperience, but due to the texture of the velvet pouches and the uneven surface of the bag with the thicker corners and the drawstring top, making it difficult to achieve even pressure across the whole pouch. Not having a soft heat press mat certainly influenced this as well. Next was to accessorize. I spent about 70 bucks or so, I know that's a lot, on coins and gems to fill the pouches, and various different jewelry making accessories of swords, keys, skulls, and so on to attach to the bags, and of course to use on future projects. Again, $70 is a lot of money, but I bought bulk sets, so I'd have a lot more to use on plenty of future projects. I mean, half of the experience of crafting is hoarding supplies, right? For the first pouch, I filled it with gems and coins and untied one of the drawstrings to attach a cool sword accessory, wound up changing it to a skull instead. You totally could call it here and be done. Like, this would be fine.
All right, well, I'm not gonna lie, it is a pretty big dopamine hit getting to see something like this get made and actually like turn out into a product. I am pretty freaking stoked with the results. There is a little bit of a hang where one of the little tips of the wing did not come out right, and the circle around it, of course, didn't happen at all. But I think for what I want, especially with the little charm, it turned out great. The dilemma I'm running into now is that it looks too nice. And this was my concern with doing heat transfer vinyl in the first place, was it's big, bright, shiny white, it's vinyl. It doesn't look very like fantasy or D&D like. It just looks... That's what I'm trying to avoid with this whole Cricut thing in the first place, is I don't want it to be, you know, IKEA furniture and cursive white and whatever. I think tomorrow I'm gonna go get some files, and I've got a tool somewhere if I can find it. I've had a tool that I could use that I used way back in like middle school and high school to like fray my jeans, to do my own ripped jeans. If I can find that and some files and just like pumpkin carving tools, and then maybe make my own little wash, I'm gonna dirty this up. This is gonna be an experiment. I may have to redo it. I wanna dirty this up. I wanna make it look like it's been worn and like used in a fantasy setting. I'm excited and very nervous to mess up something that took a little while to get here.
Too clean indeed. Weathering was needed. First step was to wear out the material. I grabbed my file set and one of those nail file sanding sticks and went to town on some of the edges and corners. Gotta think about where such an item would naturally get worn down from use, dragging, storage, and so on. I also used the Cricut weeding tool and an X-Acto knife to pick at and tear the fabric some more to really fray it, learning from my jeans ripping days in high school. The X-Acto knife just went right through the pouch. It was so sharp and the pouch was so thin, so I didn't really use it too much, but I thought a little swipe here made sense, so I didn't have to start over even though I stabbed right through the bag. This was a great start, but I still wanted more. I did what any logical person would do and grabbed my small butane blowtorch and just kinda went at it. I mostly wanted these to look like they had been blasted by some fire or magic spell or some sort at some point, and so I picked a spot to focus on and burnt it, and then got a little bit of one of the sides. I really liked how it turned out. Thankfully, the pouch did not directly ignite, and the effect I wanted was achieved. Unfortunately, I got overzealous and tried to get a burnt look going on the charm too, which just heated it up and then melted through the drawstring when I set it down, so I had to fix that up later. Next, I wanted to add some grime. Nobody in a D&D world is hand-washing their coin pouches. That thing's gonna be gross. Plus, the HTV icon itself was still a little too clean for me, and it was not holding up super well to my other weathering techniques. So I made some black wash using water, Floetrol, matte acrylic medium, and black paint, shook it up, held the pouch in a bag, and got it dirty. This worked surprisingly well. Subtlety is key here though, so I had to go for the indirect approach of spraying the box and letting the cast off get on the pouch. This was a lot messier than expected, but it definitely worked. The final details came when I broke out my miniature paints and added some fine-tuned highlights. Some blood around the swipe and side, some charring and grime around the blast point, that kind of thing. The tricky part was feeling like I had balanced the damage effects on all sides without feeling like it was just way overdone. But honestly, way overdone is fine. It's a cartoonish fantasy world, after all. After that pouch dried, I was really happy with how it turned out, so I moved on to the rest. Same process, heat press the HTV on, verify that it worked, give it some time to cool before doing the other side, then physical weathering and accessories, then paint. Eventually my crafting mats started deforming from the heat, so I definitely recommend picking up a heat press mat, and I will be using the one I ordered from now on. Files, weeding tool, X-Acto knife, blowtorch, paintbrushes, lots of meticulous weathering. I tried to make sure it was completely different on each one. Also, the indirect black wash got super messy and inevitably started leaking out of the cardboard boxes I was using for it, so maybe do that outside. Don't be like me. While everything was drying, I also did a quick print and cut of some fantasy icon stickers that I bought to give sticker sheets to everyone too. And boom, they're done. A few hours worth of work, fill them up with gold, silver, and gems, and they turned out amazing. I learned a lot about the HTV process from this. I also learned that HTV itself doesn't hold up super well to trying to do things to it, like weathering, which I had kind of assumed from the start, but was hopeful it would hold up a little bit better. Regardless, I think the effect is very well sold here, and I gave them to our party on our first session after the holidays, and everyone seemed to love them, so I'll call it a win. I'll be aiming to do more D&D and cyberpunky style crafts when I can. I really enjoy this. It just takes a lot of time to learn and to do everything and to document the process. If you have any ideas or requests you want to see me take a swing at, leave a comment below. Otherwise, check this video to learn about my D&D mini painting obsession, and remember to be kind, rewind.